Hi, I am Geoffrey Keane. For those not acquainted with my research work, I am a retired physics alumnus from Imperial College London. I have spent over 40 years researching scientifically how the mind and consciousness interacts with subtle energies, the laws of physics, and the structure of the universe. My success has been achieved by producing quantified data, leading to the discovery of equations and universal constants. My publications include 2 well-acclaimed, groundbreaking books, and I have also had published over 58 relevant scientific papers. All my research and experiments are original. I am unaware of anyone else worldwide involved in similar research. I will start with a spoiler. These are some of the exciting discoveries we are about to discuss and scientifically scrutinize the evidence. The initial motivation of my research was based on 4 questions. I have always been intrigued by the act of consciously observing quantum experiments could affect their results. I also wished to discover why quantum effects were not observed in the macro world. And how does Einstein's spooky action at a distance work? And why, after nearly 100 years of unsuccessful theoretical research, were there so many unsuccessful and untestable theories of quantum gravity? Hence, I believed a new approach to physics research was required that involved the mind. So, how do I get the mind into quantitative scientific experiments? I therefore started with several ancient techniques. These included the use of meditation, mindfulness, noetics, dowsing, visualization, vibrations, and similar research tools. Phenomena to investigate included subtle energies, psi lines, auras, and the relevance of geometry, etc. One of the first things I learnt is that geometry is an intrinsic part of researching subtle energies. This statement applies to any form of geometry. It does not matter if the geometry is 1, 2, or 3-dimensional. It can even be physical or abstract shapes drawn on paper, or sand, or just visualized. Most geometries produce their own unique noetic lines and patterns. Subtle energies distort noetic geometry. And as we will see, this distortion is used for measurements. The following are brief illustrations of some of the experimental techniques that quantified the basis of this presentation. The top illustrates my protocol, L, for measuring subtle energies. The lower diagram represents a 3-body subtle energy alignment beam. So let's detail these techniques. From all the geometric shapes I have studied, the simplest is to use for measurements is a 0-dimensional dot. As you know, most scientists avoid a singularity. But as a contrarian, this does not worry me as we will now see. The diagram illustrates my protocol L for measuring subtle energies. Paralleling a quantum mechanics fact, the act of observing a dot produces a noetic subtle energy beam. This beam should not be confused with a classical rigid rod. This beam has vector properties with a flow towards the eye. Its length is determined by local forces and other subtle energies. The beam terminates in a three-dimensional conical vortex, which has a very precise vertical axis and is easily detected. The variable length of this beam I have defined as L, which is measured from the source dot to the central vertical axis of the vortex. In practice, the length of L varies between 0 and 10 meters. It also has a perceived color of white. No doubt some of you are skeptical about these claims, so here is some proof for the disbeliever. In March 2008, I introduced 13 cynical dowsing research group members to this technique. Without any practice, and after a few seconds, they individually doused the dot and measured L. This was repeated on 6 occasions over 2 days. Here is a summary of the results. 13% variance. Repeating the group experiment 3 months later produced an interesting improvement in performance. The standard deviation had improved from a group variance of 13% to 7%, an excellent result. It even gets better. Practice makes perfect. It took me about 3 years to attain an accuracy to 2 millimeters. These results give great confidence when using this protocol and technique. So, what are the benefits of using this L technique? L can be measured very accurately to with 1 to 2 millimeters. L is very sensitive, reacting to both local and astronomical forces, such as gravity, spin, magnetism, tides, electromagnetic fields, such as light, and geometric alignments. L is also affected by other subtle energy fields, such as their flow, color, ability to pass through solids, or any vector properties. All these and more properties are of fundamental use in the following measurements. You may well ask, what is the use of L? Out of the 58 papers I have had published, about half of my findings have utilized L. I will only discuss 4 significant measurements obtained by using L. The results of these findings all challenge existing science. Let us move on to the second fundamental technique I have used in this presentation, alignment beams. When any 3 bodies are in alignment, they produce a subtle energy alignment beam. I have experimented with many 3-body alignments. These have included 3 stones, 3 grains of sand, 3 coins, 3 abstract circles drawn on paper or in sand, and even 3 planets in the solar system. In each case, they always form a strong, subtle energy alignment beam. The main factor involved in producing three-body alignments would seem to be their geometry and not their gravitational attraction or mass. This alignment beam is also perceived as having a mauve or violet colour. Interestingly, it has not been possible to determine where the beam ends. The only constraint is that the three auras must not overlap, but this is minor, as in practice the distances involved are measured in centimetres. Even if the beam is created by three very small stones, which are far away and out of sight by the observer, the beam can still be felt without any diminution in its strength. In practice, three-body alignments are rarely straight lines. So what is the tolerance of an alignment that produces a subtle energy beam? To answer this query, this graph plots the observed experimental data. The top line relates to an observer on the middle body when measuring L at the equivalent of the full moon position. The bottom line relates to an observer on the outer body when measuring L at the equivalent to the new moon position. Interpreting this graph, the maximum deviation out of perfect alignment depends on the position of the observer. This is easier to explain by comparison to an observer located on the blue sphere at new or full moon situation. For the full moon or inner body situation, the observer must be in the quadrant that has an angle of arc sine of a quarter, which is about 14 degrees. For the new moon or outer body situation, the observer must be in the quadrant that subtends an angle of arc sine 1/5, which is about 11.5 degrees. Let us now move on and use these techniques to explore the interaction of subtle energy and gravity. Many years ago, I discovered that the dimensions of auras and subtle energies at sea level increased when climbing up low hills or up mountains. The effect is even greater when flying at 32,000 feet over the Atlantic. As you can imagine, wandering around the cabin discovering this effect caused much consternation amongst the cabin crew. The things we have to do for science. So let's explore this phenomena more scientifically. These graphs show the effects of distortion on L by gravity at new and full moon, as well as eclipses. To avoid possible confusion, although the geometry may seem similar to the previous topic, we are measuring a different effect. Gravity, not alignment beams. Significantly, eclipses, which are not visible to an observer located on the opposite side of the Earth, produce identical graphs demonstrating that subtle energies pass through the Earth uninterrupted, analogous to, say, neutrinos. Full moon, the graph and diagram to the left, produces a lower gravitational force on Earth as the Sun and the Moon's gravity are pulling in opposite direction. But L peaks. New moon, illustrated to the right, produces a higher gravitational force as the Sun and the moon's gravity are pulling in the same directions. But L troughs. This is opposite to tides and gravity. It is the first hint that conventional science has been broken. It is also a good sign for the need for a new physics. Only a real geek would do this experiment. Over an 18-month period, as the Earth circled the Sun in its oval orbit, L was plotted daily against date at Pacific times, allowing for summer times, etc. The middle curve is the average. This graph was produced by extracting the 18 months daily data from the previous middle graph to plot L against the Newtonian gravitational force between the Sun and Earth on the date L was measured. Using the well-established Solarium program gave the accurate distance between the Sun and Earth as the exact time of the measurement of L. This led to our discovery of an enhanced Newtonian gravitational equation, which is exponential. In essence, the XL trend line proved that L involved the Newtonian force of gravity, F, raised to the inverse power of a constant. This equation is written above the graph. Let us look at this equation in more detail. This formula has a very high correlation coefficient, 0.97. The power index, delta, is the inverse of Feigenbaum's first universal constant within 0.013 error. Feigenbaum's constant is usually associated with bifurcation, fractals, turbulent flow, and chaos theory. This possibly reflects how the universe and life evolves. We need a new fundamental theory to explain this. I was obviously not only astounded by this unexpected relationship, but also with its very high accuracy. Before we move on from gravity, let us take a light-hearted look at levitation. This is the only topic in my presentation which I have not personally created, experienced, or scientifically measured. But I have seen convincing photographs of levitation, spoken to people who have experienced levitation, and I have spoken to people who have achieved self-levitation. We have seen from the numerous experiments we have discussed that this well-proven conclusion gives us a challenge to use this as a theoretical basis for levitation. What is worth trying is assembling a group of people and objects having the ability to produce strong, subtle energies. Suggestions could include, say, people like Tibetan monks, combined with the geometries that produce strong, subtle energies, including superimposed Pythagorean triangles that produce 9 different subtle energies, as discussed in my book, and augmented with any other favorite techniques, such as crystals for generating subtle energies. I would be very interested of anybody's success. Our next topic is velocity. Excitingly, we can use the L technique to measure the velocity of subtle energy. The following practical example also involves alignment beams. We shall now see how the speed of the mind's communication of noetic information across the solar system can be measured, and how far the alignment beam can extend, something we were unable to determine earlier. This experiment has been repeated for most three-body alignments of the Sun, Earth, and the Moon, as well as each of the planets. Now this invites a challenge. How far in the solar system can the mind reach? Well, let's try going to Neptune when it was in conjunction. This gives the maximum length of L for this type of experiment, and hence the greatest accuracy. As always, days after plotting this type of graph, I found the actual distance between the Earth and Neptune. I achieved this by resetting the excellent astronomical software Stellarium to the time and day of the experiment. As graphically shown, a sharp peak occurred at 4:37 p.m. on the 15th of September 2016. The detection of the mauve alignment beam occurred during this peak. According to precise astronomical tables, the predicted time of alignment on Earth for that date was 8:28 p.m. This 3 hours 51 minutes difference is identical to the time light took to reach Earth from Neptune, with a less than 4% experimental error. In other words, subtle energy was communicated to us instantaneously when perfect alignment occurred. Another wow moment. Before ending this section on alignment beams, it seems appropriate to answer the question set at the beginning of the previous section. Where do the three-body alignment beams end? Now, with our present knowledge, all we can say for certain is that the end is at least at the edge of the solar system. Yet another wow. It would seem that this conclusion equally applies to much smaller bodies than planets. Having had success by visualizing the mind up to the outer solar system, what happens if we do the seemingly impossible and attempt visualizing the mind going to the center of our galaxy? You're probably saying, what a crazy guy. Well, let's see what happens. The limitation of using L is that to communicate outside the solar system could take years, not hours, to confirm results. We therefore need a different intent and visualize only a one-way method of communication. After much experimentation, we also need to change the measuring the field strength of subtle energies. This graph is an introduction to the measurement of field strengths in the vicinity of each planet in our solar system. As is apparent, 3 sets of data were taken on 3 different dates. On inspection of the superimposed graphs, these 3 sets of data are in exceptionally good agreement, as are their combined Excel calculated trend line. their resultant equations are of an asymptotic logarithmic form with incredibly good correlation coefficients of 0.93, where the vertical axis L is a measure of the strength of the planet's local subtle energy, and the horizontal axis D is the planet's distance from the Sun. An initial summary is that L increases as the Sun's gravity decreases, and L decreases as the Sun's gravity increases. This confirms the previous experimental findings. Let us see what happens when we go outside the influences of the solar system. The first thing to do is change the mind's intent. The other change is to think in distances from the observer and not about gravity. This graph summarizes the field strength of the subtle energy from the vicinity of our nearest stars in the galaxy, such as Alpha Centauri, extending to those near to the center of the galaxy. Using astronomical tables and stellarium, the distance from the observer is measured in astronomical units. As is apparent, our Excel trendline equation is exponential with a high correlation of 0.87. The obvious conclusion is that L increases as the distance from the observer increases, and L decreases as the distance from the observer decreases. This is again consistent with the previous findings. So why does the previous solar system's logarithmic graph have a different formula to this exponential galaxy graph? This is the combined result of the previous two graphs. As previously discussed, the shape of the graph in our solar system is mainly determined by the gravity of the Sun and of Jupiter. In comparison, the shape of the graph outside of the solar system is mainly due to the lack of gravity, as it is predominantly empty geometry, empty space. This suggests that our initial conclusions relating to our solar system, although a good starting point, were not totally correct. This possibly suggests that gravity is not the main factor in creating or influencing subtle energies. Geometry is. In addition, do these cosmological findings reflect the expanding universe as well as any connection between subtle energy and dark energy pushing against gravity? So, let us now summarize the scientific evidence for my 15 discoveries discussed in this presentation. We have demonstrated that the mind interacts with geometry, laws of physics, and can find universal constants. My research suggests that the solution to quantum gravity probably involves consciousness and subtle energy. Subtle energies seem to have the ability to pass through solid materials without much diminution. For example, they seem to pass through the Earth as easily as neutrinos. Several different experiments prove that high levels of subtle energy are associated with weaker gravity, and vice versa. This is very important. It would also seem that the structure of the universe enables two or more bodies to know where they are in space-time, suggesting an explanation for quantum entanglement of particles. Similarly, the geometry of space-time enables three interacting bodies to know where they are in alignment. Consciousness is intimately connected to the structure and fabric of the universe. The findings suggest a universal consciousness. My research suggests that the mind and subtle energies extend at least to the center of our galaxy. Communication is not only faster than light, but instantaneous. These findings help to explain Einstein's spooky action at a distance. The findings also confirm what has long been known, that observation, or in our case, the mind and conscious intent, affect measurements. Do these cosmological findings reflect the expanding universe as well as any connection between subtle energy and dark energy pushing against gravity? So more research is needed into how and why the mind interacts with the cosmos. I hope this presentation motivates people to independently confirm and develop my findings, with the eventual goal of understanding how the brain actually achieves all the unbelievable and impossible phenomena in this presentation. If anyone requires more detail, you may find it on my website. Thank you for listening to the many new and counter-intuitive concepts. Please visit my website, jeffreykeen.co.uk, which will not only provide much more information, but will allow you to have sight of my 58 papers, which have been published over the years, and details of my 2 books.